So this week is very much about taking action, and it's about pushing forward collaboratively, listening to your ideas and thoughts, going out to industry and formalising that further. I think, you know, the vision for diversity and inclusion, because it is a wide issue. It needs to be collaborative and it needs to be inclusive of the entire industry. It's a wider stakeholder discussion. Yes, there's been research done. Yes, there will continue to be research done. We have to ask questions to be able to understanding pain points, and then a route map to moving forward. What do those solutions look like? How will we measure? What are the goals? This isn't a question for me to answer or for you to answer. It's a question for us all to answer, for us all to be involved. So the way forward, it has to be something which will last. And this is where the idea of a manifesto came, industry-wide, collaboratively designed, driven. It's about diversity and inclusion. So I would love to be able to hand over to Rax and Kuldeep just now, who I know are both online.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me and see my presentation. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story. And I just wanted to, first of all, just give you a bit of a background for me, and then move on to kind of my career journey into PR and the kind of challenges that I faced, which I think resonate with a number of people from a BAME background, and hopefully we can move forward and put to action some of the conversations we've been having over the past years. I've been in PR for 8 years now, and so I've worked in-house. I'm in-house now, and I've worked in agencies, and I'll just like to share my story with you. So these are two pictures of great moments in my life and my parents' life. Not just because I'm their favorite child, which is true, but also because this is what they have been building up for their entire life. My parents are both working class. They work in minimum wage. My dad worked in factories all of his life. My mum's been a carer. And for them to put me through university and to have that degree in my hand meant that I could have a successful career and a future that I could be proud of. And the photo on the right is my very first corporate photo. And these two are kind of pivotal moments in my life. And it was without the help of the Taylor Bennett Foundation that I wouldn't have entered into the communications industry. So I just want to talk a bit of the challenges when I was breaking into the industry. And I would like to kind of just talk about the training programs that the Taylor Bennett Foundation offered. So I found that when applying for jobs, one of the key questions was the work experience that I had gained. And for me, having worked through sixth form and at university in Dixon's and Curry's, my work experience was predominantly sales background, and those are the kind of jobs that I was being shortlisted for. And my parents, and after university, I couldn't understand why, why I couldn't break into an industry that I wanted to work in. I know I wanted to work in, to work with in an industry related to investment and financial numbers. I was interested in all of that, but I just wasn't being shortlisted for those. And I personally didn't have I didn't know that an industry in communications could be as broad as it is, and financial PR being one of those aspects. For my parents, and for a number of others in the community, to be a success, there are a few jobs or industries that they view as being worthy of pursuing. Engineering, banking, becoming a doctor, an accountant. We really didn't know about communications, and it was only really through my university and the Taylor Bennett Foundation that that kind of became apparent, that within communications you can have a successful career in pretty much in any industry that you want to. And so the Taylor Bennett Foundation, what it did to me, ultimately, the training program, the 10-week full-time program, enabled me to build up the relevant skills and the network within PR. It gave me a platform to showcase my skills. The 10-week program that I was on was partnered with MHP, and it was through that I was able to secure my graduate role at MHP in 2012. And it wasn't a kind of pity thing, because all of us on the scheme were against. It was an open application, so it wasn't just targeted at us. It was it enabled us to apply for the graduate scheme, where ordinarily I know that my application would have probably been thrown out at the first round of kind of culling of applications because of the university that I went to, or the not having the relevant work experience. And so that PR training program was pivotal in putting me in front of the right people, and the right people, seeing the potential within me. The Taylor Bennett Foundation also has a number of other schemes that you can get involved in, such as the internship programs, which is paid internships with agencies and in-house. You can get involved in master classes and mentoring program. And a mentoring program is incredibly important to help develop knowledge of the industry, as well as broaden out one's contacts and build confidence ultimately in yourself. And I think it's a reciprocal relationship. The mentor can get just as much out of it as the mentee. And so this is where I'd like to talk about where I've worked. So I've talked a little bit about how I entered MHP. I moved on to FTI Consulting, and now I'm at Savills. And all of these organizations have something similar regards to their approach to diversity and inclusion. And that is, they have programs internally that champion diversity and inclusion, whether it's an ethnicity group, a BAME group, or a diversity group. But for me, to have these groups is good, but to utilize them efficiently and effectively is another thing. Many times it's seen as an exercise where having this group is good enough, but I think companies need to realize that there needs to be a strategy in place, and a kind of top-down leadership, where senior leadership drives the initiatives and engagement from the group. And that's exactly how we do it at Savills. It's one of the companies that I've been very impressed with when I joined a year ago in their approach to their diversity and inclusion agenda, and which is that all of the groups have a board sponsor. So the board is accountable for the deliverables within the diversity and inclusion group, and the broad diversity schemes from LGBT to age, disability to ethnicity is overseen by the UK managing director. So there's a clear line of senior leadership that is accountable to the board, and I think that works very well. And I also just wanted to say why diversity and inclusion and equality is important to me, because it's about ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents. And I think that's an important question we should all be asking ourselves throughout our, when we begin to look at how it is we can support diversity and inclusion in the industry. And the business case is quite clear McKinsey have been reporting on this issue for a number of years now. And ultimately, it shows that racially diverse companies are more likely to outperform their competitors in terms of profitability. So you have a human kind of you have a real financial benefit if the human element of doing the right thing doesn't come through. So what I wanted to get here is on every level we need to be more proactive in reflecting and reaching out to communities to ensure that we are finding the right talent for our companies, for us to perform better and to give the opportunity to a broader, diverse pool of candidates. And in reality, whilst everything is pointing towards diversity being a good thing for a company, and it is the right thing to do, the CIPR State of the Nation report reported that the PR industry is less diverse than 5 years ago. When I read that, it was disheartening to me, because I know that conversations have been have progressed substantially in 8 years that I've been in the communications industry. And so what this really says to me is that there is a lot of talk, and maybe there isn't a lot of action. We need to be more proactive in helping the industry become more diverse, and maybe that is by reflecting within and looking at this from an individual perspective in terms of what it is that I am doing to further that agenda, whether it is becoming a mentor, or whether it is being part of one of these BAME groups or ethnicity groups, or whether it is working with a charity such as the Taylor Bennett Foundation to create opportunities for young and talented minds to break into the industry. And I also wanted to touch on one point which I wanted to allude on earlier, but I forgot, and which is the work experience element of this. We look at people breaking into the communications industry, and we focus on at a graduate level and an internship level, but I think the start of that whole journey is the work experience. And like I said earlier on, my work experience was limited to a sales background. I didn't know how to get work experience in a professional company, or whether those opportunities were available. And because of my parents' background, the only opportunities they could give me was, I remember my dad clearly saying after I had graduated that, when I was trying to, break into a professional career, that, he could get me an interview at the factory that he works in, and I could maybe be a manager and not do the manual labor. But that isn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to break into a professional career. And, we need to look at the internships, the graduates, but more than that, I think the journey begins at the work experience level. And maybe we don't place as much importance at that level in terms of the difference it can make into one's life, with the graduate schemes often asking for relevant work experience. How can an individual that has no connection or ties to an industry gain that work experience? And I've seen it happen a number of times where work experience opportunities have been given to friends, clients, and people just not interested in the industry at all. And I think from an educational perspective, by ramping up our educational programs into schools and to communities, number one, to showcase and highlight communications can be, you can have a successful career in that, and working through to offering people work experiences proactively. And then that filters through to internships, graduates, and then people having a successful career in the communications industry. And then, obviously without inclusion, you can't have those role models. So breaking into the industry is one aspect. But keeping that talent within the industry is another. And this is my last point. I know that I've got a limited amount of time, so I want to kind of call on all of you to help us make a difference. I hope my story has kind of highlighted some of the challenges many of us face when breaking into the industry or into PR or communications, whether it's in-house or within an agency. This is the Taylor Bennett Foundation website. I'd like you all to take a note of that. Our PR mentoring program has gone live. We've got applications that you can begin to fill in and put your name down for it. But more than that, as a charity, you know, we need donations. So however you can help us, it would be very much appreciated. And I hope that my presentation was kind of helpful to you all. And I'd like to thank you all for your time today once again. I'm just going to pass this on to Rax now.
Thanks so much, Kuldeep. I'm sorry to inflict my giant picture on you guys so early in the morning. I am Rax Lakhani, and by day I'm well, I've had 2 decades in the industry, and I am a creative contemporary comms consultant, bit of a mouthful, work in progress on that title, but in essence I've always operated within the PR industry, and I've held various in-house jobs in government, various senior roles in agencies, and about 5 years ago I decided to go it alone and become a consultant. And part of that experience has allowed me entry into a number of different PR organisations, be they in-house, be they agency. And what I see being reflected across the industry is kind of what I've always suspected. You know, we have a diversity issue, and so about a year ago, the PRCA kindly invited me to chair the diversity network, which is my add-on role to my day job, and really what I want to kind of explore today is why does the PR industry have a problem with diversity? I think it's pretty much accepted, and I'd be interested to hear afterwards if any of you disagree with the notion that we do not have a problem with that. We do have a problem with diversity. I think that we just have to look at, Kuldeep mentioned the CIPR State of the Nation report, the PRCA back in 2018, and I'll share the link to this document in the chat later on. PRCA launched its diversity and inclusion guidelines, and it was a very good kind of comprehensive starting point to have a conversation that assessed what we're doing as an industry with regards to diversity. And there's a lot of great case studies in there, lots of suggested kind of practical tips, but it was intended to be a starting block for the conversation. 2 years on, my feeling is that we kind of stalled. I think as an industry, we're stuck in this conversation. Let's talk about diversity. Every year, the PRCA has its PR and communication census. Last year's census had a whole section dedicated to diversity and inclusion. And it benchmarked lots of different criteria, from the gender balance of our profession to the average age of our workforce, to the racial and ethnic kind of makeup of our representative staff, how many people identify as having disability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, languages, neurodiversity. Lots of things were benchmarked. And almost it's great. Each year we can kind of see some trends. Kuldeep mentioned that the CIPR report says we're less diverse than 5 years ago. The PRCA's findings say actually we're moving in a kind of the right direction, but very, very slowly and not consistently across all areas. And my kind of take is, well, we have a problem with diversity, and I suggest that problem is just we're stuck in the talking mode. If we look at PR Week, in the last 3 years alone, there have been 378 articles appear on PR Week which have the word diversity in the title. Okay, we look at Twitter, we look at LinkedIn over the last few weeks, and with the resurgence and re-energization of the Black Lives Matter issue, obviously people are now starting to look at various industries, and we are not immune from that, and people are calling out practices within our industry, and some of those conversations are productive, some in my opinion aren't productive, and I think these conversations happening in silos, lots of different voices, but collectively we need to come together as an industry. And perhaps one way of framing this whole question about diversity is not, do we have a problem with diversity, but actually looking at it through the lens of, you know what, the PR industry share the same problem as diversity, okay? So the PR industry actually has a common problem with diversity. And what do I mean by that? Well, that problem in my mind is quite conveniently purpose, which is the theme of PR Fest. So as I said earlier on, I've been kind of working about my 20th year now, working in PR, and lots of very different experiences, lots of great stuff. And I genuinely wake up every morning, and going back to what Laura said at the start, purpose is about, you know, a reason to get up in the morning. For me, I genuinely love PR. All right, I'm in a very unique position. I wake up, I get to work on lots of really interesting, exciting stuff. But if I were to explain to my mum 20 years on what PR is, she still doesn't get it. And it's not just my mum. If we talk about public relations as a term outside of our industry, a lot of people don't really understand what the definition is. Okay, they might conflate it with ab fab or with political spin doctoring, or they kind of know, they've heard of PR, or they might not even know what it kind of entails, but they project onto that term whatever they see reflected in the media. Okay, but let's leave external audiences aside. If I were to ask everyone on this Zoom call to come up with their own kind of working definition of what PR is, we'd all have 50, 60 different definitions, and each definition would be from our own perspective with our own lens on. So for some people it might be about media relations. People like me who specialize a bit more in digital stuff, it might be about influencer relations or social media. It might be B2B. Some people might describe their view of PR as being B2C or sector driven, or maybe it's internal comms, or maybe it's content creation. The point is, we project onto this term PR our own perspectives. And that is exactly where we are with diversity. This word diversity means a million different things to a million different people. It's something that is a very loaded term, and in my view, it's something that people fundamentally don't understand. We talk about diversity as a catch-all phrase. Diversity is not about ethnic representation. It's not about gender equality. It's not about representation of the LGBTQ+ community. It's not about the representation of people with varying disabilities. And it is at the same time, okay? But it, as a phrase, is not synonymous with any individual cause or issue. Yet we as an industry and wider as society, we use this word diversity over and over again to the point now that it's lost its value. Okay, so the last few weeks, the conversation has invariably turned to diversity, but what do people mean? And people, when they talk about diversity, generally nowadays are talking about representation of non-white people within the industry. Now, myself, as a person of color, when I get up and talk at various events or I go to agencies and talk about diversity, people see me and they assume that my agenda is about actual representation of ethnic minorities and BAME communities within the, and it is, because it's a really important issue, but it's so important that it needs to be framed, it needs to be, I was going to let some more people in, it needs to be called out for the issues that fall underneath it. And so as a result, a lot of people don't understand what diversity is. Okay, and more than that, people kind of bring to it their own prejudices. So again, when I go and talk to various agencies, their backs sometimes are up. They feel very defensive about this word diversity because they're looking at diversity primarily through the lens of recruitment. I know that Rohan, you're here from Reuben Sinclair, and it'd be good to get your thoughts later on this, because I think diversity is an issue that is primarily concentrated at the recruitment end, but that's not the start and the end of the journey. Okay? Diversity is something that applies across the organisation. So instead of seeing diversity as a stick, as a GDPR, as a health and safety, as a legislative framework in which we need to be afraid, we need to kind of deconstruct what diversity is. So let's kind of very quickly kind of have a look at my view on this. And so I think that there are 6 stages of diversity. And I think the first one is the word itself, diversity. Now, technically, this is any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another, right? So what does that mean? So when we talk about diversity in this framework, it is very much a recruitment process. It's how do we ensure that the people that we are bringing into our industry are reflecting very diverse opinions, views, backgrounds, cultures, and experiences. Okay, and this primarily sits at a recruitment level. I think that when we go out and put on job specs, must have a graduate degree. There are many cases where that is actually valid. Yeah, there are many specialisms within PR that might need to have a certain level of education qualification. Most jobs, in my experience, entry level, don't require that. And by putting that on, we are excluding a lot of people from even considering a career. Lucy Saunders, earlier on, you mentioned that work experience in schools is really important. Getting school students into the industry by showing them what PR is. I didn't know anything about PR. I went to uni, did a law degree, came out, and then I discovered PR. And I thought, wow, I've arrived. So back in March, just before lockdown, the PRCA launched its schools initiative, which is asking its members to go out to schools and to advocate, to evangelize what we do. So diversity has been described a bit by lots of D&I experts as being invited to the party, okay? But, a stage on from there is representation. And this, for me, demonstrates the need for D&I to be talked about in terms of the output of our work. Okay, so it's pretty clear that our industry is being filled with homogeneous groups of people. Okay, and more as PRs, as comms professionals, we are expected to engage with various audiences out there in the public that we have no understanding of. And where has that resulted? Basically, we are now using very lazy terminology to connect with the audiences that we don't know. So I'm 41, and if I'd been born 2 years later, I would be considered a millennial, and I find that preposterous. I find it ridiculous that by a matter of 2 years I could be included in that category. It's so broad. When we talk about targeting new mums as part of a PR campaign, are we saying that new mums all have the same needs, requirements, social, economic kind of drivers? No, we're not. But that's how we're treating our audiences. When I first started off in PR, I was asked to look into the brown pound, and that was targeting Asian people. And I still, to this day, that I found it really offensive, because it was treating all Asian people as a homogenous group, whether it's first generation, second generation, or whether it's your Uber driver, or whether it's a heart surgeon, or whether it's a teacher or a business person, they're all being treated as a group. And that's because we do not have any understanding of the people we're trying to reach. And it's very hard to have that understanding if we are not made up of those people, okay? Following with representation is inclusion. So if diversity is about being invited to the party, inclusion is kind of being invited to dance when you're at the party. There is no point having a diversity quota, a box-ticking exercise, if that's where it stops. And inclusion is all about the cultural framework that makes sure that diversity is actually put to use, okay? And by cultural framework, you know, I've worked at many agencies and I've been complicit in this, where we boast about our internal culture, where we have drinks every Friday night, or we have office activities at the weekends, or we have away days that involve climbing trees. Now, all those are great. And at the time I was very, very proud, but actually who are we excluding? By having drinks on a Friday, are you excluding parents or carers who won't be able to actually stay behind after work? Are you excluding people who for religious reasons may not drink, may not feel comfortable in a pub, or for health reasons don't drink, or people who just don't feel comfortable in that environment? Who are we excluding by the things that we do? So by enforcing a culture, are we just by default excluding people from that experience? Just very quickly, my very first PR awards ceremony was an eye-opener. I come from a very working class background. My father was a postman. I never ever had a tuxedo. And so you turn up to one of these events and it's a shock. It's a very shock, and there's this imposter syndrome that kicks in. And I just think we're not very sensitive to how these different paradigms we have in our industry may be experienced by people who are not from that world. Okay, so just to bear in mind. So after inclusion, we have validation, and validation has two basic points. It's around value. So if you are attracting people into your organization from various diverse experiences and backgrounds, how do we make sure that they are being felt valued and recognized, and they're actively contributing to the benefit of the agency or the organization or the team? It's about celebrating, it's about championing, it's about advocacy. So when someone brings a new insight into a brainstorm, if I invite someone from the accounts team who is near retirement age and they contribute an insight that none of us millennials would understand, then how do you recognize that? But secondly, validation goes beyond that. It's about selling D&I to stakeholders, both internally, so to senior management, but also to clients as well. So Kuldeep mentioned the infamous McKinsey report from 2017, which, you know, there's been a lot of work done since then, which just proves by far now that diversity and inclusion done well can actually add a competitive advantage to your proposition. Furthermore, it can really enhance retention. It can draw in a wider recruitment pool. But clients such as Unilever, Diageo, P&G globally now are sacking their agencies, their creative agencies, because they cannot prove that they are committed to diversity and inclusion. So how do you wrap up all this stuff and market as this is really valuable, rather than just being afraid of diversity and inclusion? So really packaging it up in a positive way. And then the final two elements are equity, and equity is basic. It's all the legal framework, it's all the anti-discrimination legislation, it's all the stuff that an HR department traditionally has somewhere. It might be on your intranet, it might be in a staff guidebook, which no one really reads past onboarding. How do you navigate your way around there, making sure that you are not exposed as an organization to the latest legislation? And that's an ongoing practice. And then finally, we have network. So it's all very well organizations, and my inbox has been full of the last few weeks of agencies contacting me and saying, hey, look, we've got a diversity inclusion advisory board, we've got an initiative, we've got an internal program, and a lot of them are amazing. Some of them are not so great. But they're all taking place in silos. And I think what we need as an industry, and hopefully what this session today is kickstarting again, is saying, how do we as an industry connect with each other to share best practice and to make sure that our vehicle for diversity and inclusion isn't stalling, or it's going on to a journey, it's moving on with purpose. So it's forming all those networks and connections that I think are absolutely necessary for us to all be on the same page and also take this forward collectively. So that's a bit of a long-ended way to say that I love a forced acronym, and those who are very perceptive amongst you will see that this spells driven. Okay, so there was a very cool animation there which just didn't work. I'm gonna, for the sake of it, there you go, it's animated. Isn't that lovely? Oh wow, it jumped. I love PowerPoint. Okay, So if I were to really take a stick to this laboured metaphor of driven, what we currently are looking at diversity as is an insurance policy. So you've got a car, you absolutely need to have it insured, and we insure out of fear and out of obligation. And that's how we've seen diversity. And my proposition today is actually, let's take this driven model and look at diversity and inclusion and all the 6 elements within there and look at it as fuel. Okay, it's necessary fuel that will really make our journey easy. It will help us arrive at a destination with purpose. Okay, so today, what we're going to do is going to break out into little rooms right now, and we're going to take each of these elements, DRIVEN, and we are going to, I've got a list of questions. So if I click on this link here, it will open. Let me just share my screen. Can you see my spreadsheet there, or are you still on my PowerPoint? Don't know.
PowerPoint.
Okay, okay, let me reshare this then. So, okay, so the link that I've just shared with you will take you onto this screen, and I'm going to split you all up automatically into breakout groups, and we're going to just take about 20 minutes. Is that okay, Laura? So when you arrive on this, we just click on your group, and then you'll be taken to your tab as a group. If you could just very quickly fill out your names, each group, if you can nominate a group leader just to take notes, to act as a scribe. And then if you just work your way down, there are a number of questions. You don't have to answer them all, but all 6 of those areas or those pillars are included. And these questions are really there to lead the discussion. If you can just type your ideas where it says ideas, work your way through, and then we'll all reconvene after about 20 minutes, and then we'll kind of discuss what our thoughts are, if that is okay. I took all the responses from your first activity in terms of the various differentiating factors that everyone kind of was listing out, some really interesting ones in there, and I kind of turned it into a bit of a word cloud based on how many times people mentioned this, groups mentioned the same the same factors. So we can see, if you can, you all see my screen? Yeah. Yeah. So we've got obviously gender, we've got race, religion, age was in there because it was an example. But some really great ones near hair length, and absolutely hair length is a valid one, because, you know, sometimes it depends on your employer. Sometimes that is used as maybe not a discriminatory factor, but very much something that might set you aside from other people depending on your hair. And actually, on a more serious level, I know a lot of colleagues of mine from who are black have reported that actually, you know, being made to straighten their hair, or you know, having their hair as they you know, as it grows, being frowned upon and being told to just kind of scale it back, whatever that means. So it is a very valid differentiator that needs to be addressed. We've got appearance being mentioned in there, dress code. I think that is quite critical. And there will be some certain work environments where you will be asked to dress in a certain way. You might have a dress code, but more often than not, in my experience, the dress code is an exclusion factor. And it might be based on perceptions that are 20 years out of date. What is acceptable for one person to wear, what they feel comfortable in, be it for cultural reasons, or just be it because that's what they're about. Are we, by imposing dress codes, are we saying that actually we frown upon that? Languages is another one again, and I think language is a positive. I think that more and more, as PR goes more and more global, as our client base actually requires language skills, are we doing enough to attract people who speak more than one language outside of English? That's definitely an advantage in my book. Things like seniority are quite interesting, it's this hierarchical model that we're obsessed with across a lot of the PR industry, it can be a very, very conscious divider within the actual team structure itself. Geography is named there as well. So, you know, where are you based? And in this age of remote working right now, we've seen people, just today's PR Fest so far, people from all around the country. I was on a PRCA a global call the other week, and people from around the world. So actually the barriers to geography are becoming less and less. And so when we actually look for people to join our organizations, are we using geography as a bit of a red herring, as a criteria for application? So lots and lots of really interesting stuff there. What I'll do is I'll take a deeper look into the document to see what else people have pulled out. But I pulled that out about 5 minutes ago, and I think everyone will filled their bits in. So it'd be really good right now if we could just go through the doc itself. And I'm really sorry, because I know this session will need to end in a while, but I think there's some really interesting conversations that have started. So let's just go, maybe, I don't know the best way of doing this, Laura. I was going to suggest, maybe I was going to just look through and go through kind of group one, which
yeah, if you could get the leaders just to feedback from each group, just take me a minute to do that.
Cool, Deep, group one, what were your, if you could just take us through kind of what you've got, and if it helps, shall I just make you a host for this bit, and then you can make me a host back, if that's all right?
Yeah, or you can just scroll down to the just the issues,
perfect.
The 5 issues, and then it's there. Yeah, perfect. Let me just minimize this. Yeah, so this kind of evolved into a really good discussion, and we only managed just to focus on the pillar 1. But I can take you through some of our thought processes. So on issue 1, on what can be done to make job application process appeal to a wider pool of experiences. You know, one of the easy ways, and I think a lot of companies are kind of exploring this, is to remove the unconscious bias and anonymize applicants. So take out the names, take out, you know, maybe the universities, those types of elements that you can automatically, you know, where you know, associate certain things with certain unconsciously. If you anonymize those, then perhaps it will, you know, you'll find you're shortlisting a broader pool of candidates. Another one is advertising to a wider variety of places. So we know that, you know, PR Week or, you know, Gorkana, there's a few places where, you know, we can target the PR industry. But have you thought about, you know, maybe reaching out to charities like Taylor Bennett Foundation or other charities, BME, PR Pros, and, you know, community publications, maybe targeting those to kind of reach out to areas and communities that, number one, as we discussed earlier on in our presentation, you know, not really aware of the opportunities that are available in communications. And number two, just to kind of push people to be more proactive in, you know, finding the candidates that will be best for your business rather than waiting for them to come to you. And that forms part of the education process as well. Thirdly, we said different forms of process, and I think we particularly mentioned in the early stage of recruitment, so not just looking at CVs and videos in the forms of recruitment. So rather than the standard face-to-face interview, perhaps broadening it out at the early stage, maybe it happens later down the line, to incorporate various other methods, which include videos and stuff. Issue 2, what can be done to expand the places in which the industry seeks to announce new roles to potential applicants? So digital, obviously, you know, it kind of links into what we were saying in issue 1. Digital opportunity, you know, it reaches so many people these days. So if you're not using digital properly and effectively, and this goes for kind of paid outreach as well. So you can target very specific groups of people through paid advertising. So maybe that could be incorporated into recruitment processes and outreach. I'm just going to move on to issue 3. What could be put into place to identify unconscious bias? again, you know, most of these ideas and issues, they have a kind of a very linked in themes that anonymize the recruitment process. An important thing is to get feedback from the applicants as well as the people doing the interviews on the process, to see where there was, you know, maybe there was areas of questioning that they were uncomfortable with, or whether there was something that wasn't asked that could have brought to light some of the talents and skills they have. And obviously, again, unconscious bias training, the internal audit, and equality monitoring. Issue 4, what can be done collectively to promote the notion that PR industry is open to people from all backgrounds. And this, you know, the simple idea is just PRing what we do, celebrating diversity, and again, transparency, you know, making public what we're doing to address some of these key issues. You know, maybe they could be incorporated to the website or annual reports, and making, just be more visual about the people within your organizations from all backgrounds and celebrate that. Issue 5, other specific obstacles the industry have in place that may prevent more diverse groups of people considering. I guess paid internships is one of the key ones, and I noticed that was in the chat earlier as well, and it's a very valid point. You know, having senior role models. You can't be what you can't see, as Melissa put very well. You know, if we're not, and it feeds into the inclusion aspect. Without inclusion, you know, diversity, you can't have diversity without inclusion. We need to be making sure that we're attracting the right talent into the industry, and we're also nurturing it and helping it grow within the industry. Widening the circle of people you go to, being less cliquey, and education were some of the other points raised as well. And yeah, we only managed to get pillar 1 done, but I hope some of those points were helpful.
Perfect. That's really, really helpful. I'm just really aware of time, and I'm sorry, that's my bad. But if we can go on to kind of group 2, did you have any kind of thoughts to add to that, or shall we move on? Is there anything on the diversity? Yeah.
No, so hi, it's Simon here. So we started at the bottom and worked our way back. We thought if everyone does the same, then so I think sort of the main headline points really. There's also a lot in here that people can go through, but with the network point of view, I think we felt strongly that it's perhaps the profession has gone as far as it can, looking at itself. And perhaps in order to bring all of this together and to hold us to account, we need to think of an external supporter or champion for this, somebody with a human rights or equalities background who could convene a board made up of CIPR, PR Fest, BME PR Pros, Intercoms, all of the groups that we might want to include in this network and in the activity. But we felt that it's perhaps time that we look outside of our own circles for some help in terms of bringing that board together. In terms of, we had also had a look at pillar 5, and one of the questions there was just about kind of how do we, when you think about how many small businesses there are that either agencies or use PR, to think about how there might be need for a virtual HR service as part of membership bodies like the PRCA or the CIPR to offer, just as a way of helping those organisations through it. And then finally in pillar 4, we sort of looked at and Sarah, one of the people in the group, talked about kind of their idea, one of the things they do about sharing different life experiences with the wider team, and how they all share, or in one of her previous jobs they shared what working life was like in other cultures and working practices from around the world, and we thought that was again something that could be replicated on an industry-wide scale.
Perfect. That's brilliant. That's some really great points there. There's a lot to take in, but I really like the virtual HR kind of service, and just having a code of conduct manifesto, which hopefully this starting conversation, it's just a starting conversation, but we'll have to kind of take a step. Group 3, Louise, is there anything that you'd like to add? You've covered.
Sorry, I was trying.
Oh, no
Yes,
worries.
sorry, I was trying to unmute. I think Katrina's going to talk on my behalf. I was scribing.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Katrina. You there, Katrina?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good, good, good. So what do your group kind of come up with? What bit do you focus on?
With regard to making the job application process for new PR positions appeal to the wider pool, our first thought was go to where people are, find their perspectives and find the context to tease out undervalued and transferable skills. So rather than look for a regular talent pool, literally, I think somebody said this in the group, throw a thumbtack at a map and see if you can find people rocking up in Tottenham or Brixton. Go to places that are ordinarily not exposed to PR as a career choice and find out if they're interested. If they're not, at least you've given them the option. Valuing transferable or personal skills or measurement in PR is very narrow in terms of the skills that are required to bring to a job application or an internship. We need to look outside of what is easily measurable on a spreadsheet and realize that people bring their whole selves to work, which is what we want inevitably. But you can't test for a narrow stream of skills and then not expect people to leave out the parts that could add to them being professionals in the field. We talked a little bit more about measurement, and we need to just figure out how to engage people where they're at. Stop expecting them to come to us. What could be done to expand the places in which the industry seeks to announce new roles to potential applicants? Challenging organizations to promote their networks and endorse others. Support established groups such as the Taylor Bennett Foundation and universities. Again, this is a question of intersectionality, where the groups that are underserved have their mouthpieces, they have their networks, and they have their places where people of like mind go. Seek those places out, go there and find out why they're not being engaged, and start with that. If we go to the same places to get our data, we'll get the same information out of it. What could be put in place to identify the biases that emerge from the PR recruitment processes? This has been discussed earlier. So no names or ethnic profiling through anonymous applications. One thing we found interesting was that the expectation of a particular standard English may rub up against people the wrong way, but the reality is, and that's hard for me even as a wordsmith, because I'm quite a purist when it comes to the English language, but as wordsmiths and as PR people, we have to acknowledge and accept that nomenclature is an evolving, growing thing.
Yes.
And no, we don't necessarily want a cover letter that begins "Yawa Guan Fam," but we need to be a little bit more flexible in terms of meeting people again where they're at in a way that is that's comfortable to them.
Totally.
Collectively promoting the notion that PR is open to people from all backgrounds. Having key role models lead the conversation. Let them talk about why it's a joyful thing for them to do, what makes them swing their feet off the bed on a morning to go work in PR. Let them talk about that, amplify that as a positive. If people don't see themselves, they don't aspire to be these people. You set a tall order for us, Rax, and we really did.
I know.
This is a whole day in and of itself.
We'll just
this will be used as a template to start with, so everyone will continue to feed into this, so please don't worry. In fact, afterwards you could probably go and look at it again if you wanted to feed into more of it.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. Thanks, Laura. So finally, on issue 5, what other specific obstacles does the industry have in place that may prevent a more diverse group of people, and how can these barriers be eliminated? We talked about the brands that PR represents. Quite a few of the grassroots brands that some people from minority backgrounds engage with don't have what appears to be a very slick, handheld, polished corporate image. When you see MAC Cosmetics, you expect that they have a PR team. When you see Sephora, even though they've done a pretty terrible job during COVID, you expect. When you see GlaxoSmithKline, you expect that they have a team. But the guys who are into grunge, who print their own t-shirts in the back and are promoted by Stormzy, they don't look like the kind of people who have a slick PR team, but through their grassroots efforts, they do have a network, they do have a distribution network, they do have people who promote the work that they do in the way that suits their audience. So I think as an industry, we need to reach hands across the water a little bit more, and and let our brands reflect our personnel. It can be alienating because, you know, if my brother wanted to get into PR right now, he's into fast cars and even faster girls, but he's not seeing anybody other than Lewis Hamilton and recently Bubba Wallace as an exemplar. He's not seeing anyone managed in that kind of way. No, he's a very
really
good
well put. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of teach younger generations, and we recognize that this has more to do with schooling and the way education is set up than PR. But I know that we need to do more as an industry, but we also are working within a society where children and young people need to be taught not how to think, but not what to think, but how to think, and how to approach us in a way that suggests they have a little bit of tenacity. And even if they don't have all the skills all polished, we're prepared to take that attitude and train it and expose it to things. Whereas so far, one of our contributors was saying that in her experience with teaching, there's no motivation to challenge, the reticence to think outside the box, to think at all, and the expectation of being spoon-fed can be a hindrance to our recruitment process. But that's a whole other, that's a breakout conversation.
That's brilliant. I'm going to just spend the rest of the day going through a lot of this stuff and trying to work it up into a document that we can share with everyone. Thank you so much, Katrina, and the group there. Group 4, if there's anything else that hasn't been raised, any kind of key points that you'd like to raise? Who was in that group? Richard, is there anything?
Yeah, I'll speak. Well, I'll speak for me, and I'll apologise to the group because I'm going to leave everyone with just 2 thoughts, and so that ignores all of the work that was done and Claire's navigation of the spreadsheet and typing in. So that will come later. 2 thoughts. Let's take all of the good things out of this lockdown and not lose them. Education is more widely open to people from wherever they are. There are classes, there are courses, many of them are free. The workplace, there's less conformity because people don't have to live in London, don't have to work in Soho, don't have to dress the same, look the same, go to the... So let's capture the good things out of a difficult time because that's breaking down barriers. Second thought, with a big fat tongue in the cheek, we've just sacked Alistair McCapra and Francis Ingham.
Wow. Okay. I don't know whether I should open this can. In terms of very briefly, in terms of in one sentence, could you elaborate on that?
Well, look, with a smile on the face, with tongue in cheek, but it was a suggestion in the group, and I won't name who it came from. And don't tweet it. It's frivolous, but of course we've got to look at ourselves. Though actually, in fairness, my focus was on the preponderance of people who aren't like me. A 50-something male. We got too many 20-something females, probably, if you look up at the makeup of the industry. But clearly there is something wrong about too many older white males in too many positions of power. There you go.
Perfect. That's really handy. What I will say, I know, Laura, I know we're very pressed for time now. So what I propose is in the remaining groups, in kind of a minute or less, is there anything that hasn't been covered off that you think is worth sharing right now? Otherwise, I propose me having a look through, trying to consolidate some of the stuff, and maybe us all reconvening either via email or having another session in the future to kind of pick up on some of these points. And I've really talked to each and every one of you actually about what your perspectives are.
So the idea is that we obviously continue to feed into this, and we come back with a draft manifesto that we've all fed into and that goes out to other groups, organisations and communities and public relations to be able to get them to feed into as well.